taking the role of women to its pinnacle. First of all, condolences to all the dear viewers, wherever you have joined us from, on the martyrdom anniversary of the Lady of Heaven, Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra alayha salam. Let me introduce my guests. We have with us the Honorable Hujjatul Islam al Muslimin, Samahat Sayyid Muhammad Radawi. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid, and condolences to you on the martyrdom anniversary of Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra alayha salam.
Wa alaikum assalam, and condolences on Shahadat and martyrdom of Fatimah Zahra salawatullah alayha, the lady who is known to be the leader of the all women of this world and paradise.
And joining us as the guest of the week, we have with us Maulana Faizul Hassan Zaidi. Salamun alaikum, Brother Hassan, and thank you so much for being with us and giving us from your busy schedule.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I also like to give the condolences of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam to our viewers, listeners, wherever they are listening to the program.
Thank you. Of course, our condolences extend to the Imam of our time and to the Holy Prophet alayhi salam, for whom Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was known as Abiha and partner of his mission. I will start the first question with you, Sayyid Faizul Hassan, and that is, women, of course, prior to Islam faced an institutional oppression. If you can tell us more about the status of women before Islam, and how did Islam dismantle these institutional oppressive structures that were in place?
Yes. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. It's well documented that pre-Islam, the culture, the society, how the Arab society were divided into different groups, and what were their value system, how did they treat one another, and what was their priority. So this is all well documented. So before Islam, women lived in a world of complete darkness. They were treated as property, denied dignity, and in some cases even buried alive, which is well documented and it's been well narrated everywhere. They had no say over their lives, no inheritance, no honor in society. And then Islam came like a divine earthquake. So the whole system and the culture they had, the priorities they had, Islam turned it upside down for them, shattering these oppressive norms that was part of their culture. They had no, for example, if you look at the human nature, they should be crying for losing a child, but they were happy and they thought this was a pride to bury their young daughters. Allah Himself intervened, subhanahu wa ta'ala, granting women rights over marriage, inheritance, property, education, and spiritual destiny. So Arabs, I assume, at that time, Middle East at that time, when I say Arabs, I don't mean Arabs as a race, but what I mean is at that time, they were so much drenched in darkness and backwardness, unfortunately. So Islam didn't just adjust the society, it uprooted an entire civilization's mindset and rebuilt it upon justice, honor, and dignity. Allah elevated the woman from being just owned to being recognized as a soul with value, purpose, and divine potential, basically. So this was something really unique for that society, where once they would, as I said, they would see women as assets, or worse than even animals sometimes. For example, horses were more important than a female human being, because they were burying them alive, while horses were treated even in better conditions and given higher values, for example. So that was the type of situation women were living at that time.
Thank you, Faizul Hassan, for this brief introduction that you have given us. Syed, I would like to pick up on some of the points that Brother Faizul Hassan mentioned. And that is, he said that women at the time prior to Islam were owned and inherited. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran also states that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق نحن نرزقكم وإياهم. Woman was very oppressed in terms of financial, and she was also used. So she was forced into prostitution, for example, in order to earn money for her family. How has that changed today? Has the exploitation of women different today, considering the social media and how women are used in that terms?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good point and good question. That have we progressed and learned lesson from the history or not? In reality, if we look at what is happening in our society with the women and their rights, although there is a lot of propaganda that so-called Western society is in favor of women, but in reality, women have been forced into labor of the society, and they have been ignored. Their rights have been ignored, and if you compare to the rights of women before Islam and after Islam, you would see quite a lot of similarities in the present day in life between the non-Muslim societies, although some Muslims are very keen to copy the Western civilization, which is not in their benefit. They would be more successful and better if they copied the teachings and copied the examples set by Bibi Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha and Bibi Zainab salawatullah alayha, and they would learn more from them rather than following the so-called role models of our society the who are just the victims of the consumer society today. I mean, people are using them to present their products through the women, and they are abusing them in different form. What Islam did was Islam gave the right to women that didn't exist before that. For example, if you look at the history before Islam, you find that women had no right to vote, they had no right to own a property, they didn't used to inherit, and even the wives of the father were inherited by children, and they could do whatever they liked to do with the wife of their father, and women had no rights at all. And Islam came, gave them equal rights. It gave them importance. Even Prophet Muhammad and Imams used to do bay'ah with the ladies and men, both, which showed that they treated them equally as men. And if you look at the Islamic jurisprudence in relation to women's right, in Islam, a lady who becomes a wife of a husband, a man, she is not required to do any hard work to earn the living for the family. All the responsibility is with the husband, and the lady can just sit and raise the children according to Islam. This is the biggest responsibility that Islam gives to the mother, and mother is considered as means center figure who would raise the future generation. So Islam looks at women as the nurturer of the future generation. So the nurturer of the future generation should be taken care of and should not be burdened with the responsibilities that are not designed for her being. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the women, they are not designed for the ladies. Of course, ladies can educate themselves, they can achieve the highest position in the society. There are no restrictions, with the exceptions of very few. They can reach any highest level, But at the same time, they are not legally obliged to provide the maintenance of the family. Providing the maintenance of the family is the responsibility and duty of the husband.
Thank you. Of course, Sayyid Faizul Hassan, as the Sayyid mentioned, uh, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, alongside with the Lady Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, brought a revolution in the Arabian Peninsula that the non-Muslim societies today need to learn from and not replicate the same ignorances that that society had fallen into. And Rasulullah very drastically changed. Of course, in the West, we have seen the past 200 years marked some revolutions in the sense of the emerging of feminism and the second wave of feminism in the 60s. But Rasulullah, and along with Lady Fatima Zahra, brought all these changes back then. But if I take you a little bit back, a little bit further from Lady Fatima Zahra's time, and that is to Lady Maryam's time. What was the situation at her time for women, and how did she change the status quo about women and their spirituality in the era that she lived in?
Very good question. And just adding on to what you've said earlier, when you're right, when the rights have been brought through Islam, through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and our Holy Lady, Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, then now what rights have they now given? For example, in the, as you said, in the 1960s, etc. What was it that they were given that wasn't given during Prophet's time when Islam had brought those rights? So that's a very valid question, and I think we should ponder on that a bit more and discuss that a bit more so that our viewers can also understand the situation. It's not that the rights are not given, it's that the responsibilities have been changed, or an engineering structure has changed, that women are now expected to behave like men. And this is what's happened. That what's happened is that they are now culturally told you are inferior if you're not like a man. And this is what Syed said, for example. Syed said that they were given their rights and everything was there, but the values are not being given now. The values of a woman is still not being appreciated. She's been exploited in different ways. So the rights are there, but the exploitation has still not changed. It's just changed its color, for example. Before there was barbarity, now we're willingly accepting this, where we call it in the name of freedom to be, for example, nude. Or as you said, for example, it's now an honor to sell your body, for example. It's now seen as a normal business transaction. So before those things were seen as an abuse, now they're seen as, actually, this is my right, it's my body. And this can be seen especially in the West, where, for example, a female believes, a human being, a mother, believes she has a right to kill her child in the womb because it's my body, it's my right, which is totally against the values of a woman, for example, of a motherhood, where a mother is a protector, a nurture, for example. So now she's been told, actually, no, you're a nurture, but go against your instincts of being a nurture by killing the child in the womb. So this is something that I think this is how we've gone from one end to the other end, for example, in the name of rights, which and it's been doctored in a way where it's been shown in a way as a glamour. And this is what Shaitan says. He presents something ugly, looking very pretty, packaged really well, and we assume this is the right thing when actually it's in our loss, it's in our against our nature, against our fitrah, for example. So that's, I just wanted to add on to that, basically, from Syed's conversation and your question on that point. But coming back to the second question that you raised,
Say the
if we
Maryam
look at, so this, yes, Sayyida Maryam. So coming back to that point, so we can see that at some point in history, and I think maybe Quran is the best example of letting us know when this where this situation started, where they started to see women as an inferior. So that was it was a stage when humanity now was coming to the next phase of civilization, for example, and they were now seeing things differently because communities now were more cohesive together. There were more empires, civilizations. So they were now moving to a different kind of epoch. And in that now, there was this new imbalance. The imbalance was that women are inferior, men are spiritually on a certain level. And this had even started in the people that were believing in God, people of the book, for example, the Bani Israel. And so this kind of concept was now creeping in to the monotheistic religion. And so that was the beginning of giving women their rights and telling them what position they have. Because already this momentum of inferiority, giving devalue to the woman, and seeing it from a very materialistic perspective or from a very masculine perspective or materialistic perspective, that had started to happen in societies. They were now seeing things as strength, opposite weakness, what benefits, and exploitation, for example. So, Bibi Maryam alayhi salam, Lady Maryam, she was the starting point of fighting against that kind of ideology, that kind of materialistic ideology, where when society insisted that spiritual greatness could only come through men, for example. So it was the spiritual aspect that Bibi Maryam touched on. So Allah chose a woman, Maryam alayhi salam, to carry out the greatest prophets without a man, for example, carry out his missions, for example. Though through her, Allah shattered every patriarchal illusion, for example. He made her a miracle, a sign, a chosen soul above all women. Her story stands in the Quran as a declaration for us, basically, that closeness to Allah is not restricted to by gender. Bibi Maryam became the proof that purity, leadership, and divine selection belongs to whoever Allah wills. So He could select whatever gender He wants to select. It's not exclusive for just one kind of for one kind of gender. So this was a breaking of a status quo where they thought only the rabbis and male rabbis can only be part of that spiritual journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is where that breaking of that concept started.
Thank you. Syed, I'd like to bring you in here, and if you can elaborate a little bit more on what Syed Faizul Hassan just mentioned about breaking this boundary that only men can achieve the highest spirituality, and they are the only ones who have access to the places of worship. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use Lady Maryam alayhi salam and helped by Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam in breaking this status quo? If you elaborate a little bit more on this, how the Quran mentions actually what happened, and how did Prophet Zakaria bring Lady Maryam into the place of worship, and what did they face? What was the situation in society at that moment in time?
Yes, as far as Islam, when I say Islam, I believe that Prophet Adam brought the religion of Islam. He introduced the religion of Islam, which means submission to the will of God. And this was the message of every single prophet, including Jesus Christ. He wanted his followers to submit their will to the will of God. And in other words, followers of all prophets were Muslims. So, and Islam was introduced by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the way of living for the humankind and in this planet world. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is a wise creator, knew what will happen in the future. So he planned by introducing Hazrat Maryam salawatullah alayha as a lady who brought Jesus into this world. And there are many churches around the world who give equal or in some cases even more importance to Hazrat Maryam than Jesus Christ. And I've seen statues of Hazrat Maryam placed in the churches, and they bow in front of the statue of Hazrat Maryam and they give respect to her. And so Hazrat Maryam was the important personality introduced by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which gave the message that it's not only the men's responsibility. Ladies are equally responsible and they can reach the highest status. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduced in the verses of Holy Quran Fatima, Hazrat Maryam salamullah alayha as the one of the pious, most pious and respected ladies of Islam, of humanity, of the for the followers of all divine faith. So definitely this the ice was broken by arrival of Hazrat Maryam salamullah alayha, and then later on by Hazrat Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha, then by her daughter Bibi Zainab salawatullah alayha. I was looking at the sermons that Fatima gave and Hazrat Zainab salawatullah alayha gave in the presence of their enemies. If the same sermons had been given by Imam Ali or Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, or Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam, they would not have survived. But as a lady, Fatima and Zainab dared to mention the points that could not be mentioned by a man, and the enemy had to apologize in front of Bibi Zainab and Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha that it was not us, it was someone else. They tried to pass the blame to others. So Islam gave importance from the beginning to the ladies by Hazrat Maryam salamullah alayha, but unfortunately some of our Muslim brothers did not give the equal respect to Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. If the way Christians give importance to Hazrat Maryam, if Muslims had not tried to hide the importance of Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha, they would have achieved much more, and the ladies would have learnt much more from the example set by Fatima and Zainab salawatullah alayha.
Certainly, it's a very interesting, Syed, that you just mentioned the sermon of Lady Fatima Zahra alayha salam in Masjid al-Nabawi. Sayyid Faizul Hassan, this sermon was, of course, by Lady Zahra that shook the foundations and of people, and it awakened people and awoken generations to come, and it's having an effect even today. Of course, when she delivered this sermon, she did not deliver it in front of normal lay people. She delivered it in front of a group of Sahaba, of Muhaddithin, of high caliber people who are considered in the Islamic time. And yet she, with her eloquence, she awakened people's hearts and awakened people's minds. So considering who she was speaking in front of, it's an important thing to take into account. But my question to you, Sayyid Faizul Hassan, is in what way is Lady Fatima Salamullah alayha also the peak of spirituality? As you mentioned earlier, if you would like to elaborate a bit more on this point.
Yes, for example, we could say that Our Holy Lady is the leader of all women that have come and have to come, for example. But I wouldn't say this is, for example, the peak of spirituality. This is called leadership. It's called management. But the question is more focused on her spirituality. What makes her at that peak? Because sometimes people get confused with this. They say, well, she's spiritual because she's the leader of all the women that have come and that have to come, for example. That's a skill, we could say, for example, that the Bibi has, Our Holy Lady has. But that doesn't equate to spirituality, because these are called features. What spirituality is, I would say, is that is a person who reached the summit of perfection in spirituality. So when I speak about her, I'm not speaking about an ordinary human being. So I am, for example, speaking about the axis of divine light. So she's that center. And how do we understand that center is from, for example, from Hadith Kisa, where, oh no, not from but from Hadith Kisa as well, and also from Mubaila, for example. If you see when they were going to the debate to debate the Christians, the way they walked towards the Prophet at the front, Imamat at the back. So she was one step ahead of Imamat and one step behind Nabuwat. So if she went a step ahead, she would be, as we say, she would be touching on Nabuwat. And if she went one step back, she would be touching on Imamat, for example. So her spirituality is surrounded by both of these rivers, the Nabuwat river and the Imamat river, for example. Also, for example, what we need to take into consideration is that something that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, and this is where I think where we can understand her spiritual level, where the Prophet says, so the Prophet himself declared that Allah's pleasure is connected to her pleasure, and His anger is connected to her anger. So that's the elevation of Hazrat Fatimah alayhi salam, that Allah's desire or Allah's anger and pleasure are based on our Holy Lady's temperament. That's a high spiritual level for someone, and no one has had that honor. So, for example, whoever upsets our Holy Lady, then they upset even Allah. So that's a high spiritual elevation. So rather than saying she's the leader of all the women, that's a feature. This is a spiritual position where when you reach such high spirituality that your pleasure is what Allah approves, and your displeasure is also what Allah approves, for example. So this is how I would see this as that point, and I'm sure Sayyidina will add more onto this as well.
Yes, Syed, what would you like to add on the spirituality of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam and the stations that she has reached in terms of her role in Islam?
I would like to quote Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam in giving tafsir, an explanation of Surah Al-Qadr. He says, Al-Laylatu Fatimah wal-Qadr Allah. These are words of Imam Jafar Sadiq. Al-Layla in Allah fi Laylatul Qadr. Layla means Fatima and Qadr means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, فَمَنْ عَرَفَ فَاطِمَةَ حَقَّ مَعْرِفَتِهَا فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَ اللَّيْلَةَ الْقَدْرِ. Whoever recognizes the status of Fatima the way it should be recognized has actually understood the importance of Laylatul Qadr. So he compares Laylatul Qadr with Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. And then he adds and acknowledges that Fatima, why she was named Fatima, because her personality and status would never be understood. وإنها سميت فاطمة لأن الخلق فتموا عن معرفتها. The reason she was called Fatima because the creation were unable to understand and recognize the status of Fatima. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala named her as Fatima, that who would never be truly and properly understood. And that is the fact. Even amongst the Muslims, they give importance to other ladies but ignore the lady for whom verses of Holy Quran were revealed in Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them in Holy Quran, and these Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha is ignored. There is a verse in Holy Quran which quotes Fatima Zahra and her children, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. That we feed for the sake of pleasure of Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we do not want any reward or thanks from anyone. Who are these people? These are Fatima and her children who are fasting, and suddenly a beggar comes at the door and they give whatever they had prepared for their own fast, breaking the fast. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liked this act that he had to mention it in the Holy Quran in praise of Hazrat Fatima sallallahu alaiha. So, unfortunately, Fatima is someone who has been oppressed not only by others, first by our own Muslims, our own Muslim brothers and sisters who do not try to recognize and understand her personality and position. I was quite shocked to listen to a clip. The person who went to some Muslim countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries and interviewed some youth and asked them who is Fatima. Nobody knew who is Fatima. So they are kept so much in ignorant. And the reason they are kept in ignorant about Fatima Zahra salawatullah alaiha, because they are afraid that her position will uh, overlap positions of all other ladies that are given importance by them in the Muslim world. And there is another example of Fatima. Muhammad Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam says, Zaraballahu masalan مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء. He explains the explanation of this verse, which explains the tree in Quran, the شجرة طيبة in Quran, and he says this is Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha and her children and her descendants. So Quran
Thank you,
speaks
Syed.
about their importance.
These important points actually you've raised, Syed, because a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters do say that Sayyidah Maryam is Sayyidatun Nisa, and she is important because there is a whole entire surah named after her in the Holy Quran. But you just mentioned so many ayahs that were revealed in the honor of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam. That reminds me also of a narration by our sixth holy Imam where he says that Sayyidah Maryam was the leader of the women of her time, but Lady Fatima Zahra alayha salam is the leader of the women of all times, including of this world and after. Okay, so if we move the discussion on, we are now in the last 15 minutes of the program. Sayyid Faizul Hassan, how do you see the role of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam and her example for every dimension of a modern woman's life?
Yes. So when we look at the life of Lady Fatima, Her Holiness, we can see a complete blueprint for humanity. Spiritually, she is unmatched. Intellectually, her sermon of Fadak, which we just discussed, it stands out as one of the greatest political and I would say theological masterpieces ever spoken, for example. Socially, she is a pillar of compassion, raising the imams, two imams, guiding women, supporting a community. They're well documented examples of her life, her very short life, but very quality driven life, for example. So she raised the imams, for example, and politically she stood against injustice with courage, which is an example for all women as well. But whatever situation they're in, they have to stand up for injustice within their own ways and power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. For example, there is a stats where you will notice that girls learn to speak earlier than boys, for example. Eloquence has been given to girls more. And this dimension also clarifies that, because the way Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam stood up for injustice, the way she gave that lecture, that sermon on the Fadak point in Masjid al-Nabawi, this itself is an example of how eloquence is at its peak. Our Lady, Holy Lady, she doesn't just merely participate, she was leading. And that's why we say she's the lead of all the women. We've already discussed about, for example, Hazrat Maryam was maybe of that time, but the daughter of Rasulullah is a different story. Unfortunately, what's happened is we don't use rationality and logic behind this. When all Muslims agree that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the seal of all the prophets, there is no prophet greater than him. Therefore, it logically does make sense that whoever he has close to him, and when he says Fatima is part of me, that means there can be no one else equivalent to our Holy Lady, for example. But as we've said, it's a political drive to not to highlight this point, because when we do highlight these points, a lot of other things will be opened up. And when those other things will be opened up, they will then show that where is the truth, where is justice, where is the right place of haq, for example, the justice where it should have been. So this is the problem, and that's why they want to avoid this, keep this closed, not to be discussed. And just adding on that point, what I would like to say is that there's a reason why we have two dates of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, of her shahadat, her martyrdom. Why is that? It's because that we reiterate this phenomenon that happened, the event that happened twice, so that this truth can pierce those noble hearts that are not aware at the moment. For example, previously I was just doing a show a few hours ago in the morning, and I just want to repeat it here in English as well, that we do Ashura for 10 days, and that finishes. But for Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, we do 10 days of mourning. There's a logic and planning behind this, because when we did Ashura, when we did Azadari for Imam Hussein, we clearly showed what is truth, justice, and what is injustice, what is zulm, and who were the culprits. The reason why twice we have to do this here, and this is my understanding, which I've understood from a lot of Allama as well, is that so that we can expose the injustice happened truly and where the source of all the problems started from. And that's why this is a highlight. So Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam is a symbol of fighting against injustice at that point.
Thank you. I mean, there is a point that I would like to actually raise from what you've said. You mentioned that Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam was the peak of compassion. I mean, she's been known in history to have given away her wedding dress on her wedding night to a beggar and a needy person. She has sacrificed her meals when she was most hungry and needed food. But why, and both of you have mentioned her going to fight for the land of Fadak. A lot of people ask, when this lady was not after material possessions, then what was this fight all about? Why did she go and ask for her rights for the land of Fadak? Sayyid Faizul Hassan.
I would say because if Sayyidina, our Holy Lady, didn't fight for that, then I believe that to this very day, women would not have been given their rights to have inheritance if she did not stand that ground that day, because they were justifying, which was not justifiable, that the daughters are not given inheritance, for example. So if she didn't take that stand, in my understanding, today, this day, there would have been a dispute with the different sects that we have, that women do not inherit, only the son might inherit, and they would have gone against the Quran itself. This is completely against what was given, the rights that were being given to the woman at that time, and they were going backwards. They were now going backwards on the rights that were given to women. So if Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam did not stand that ground, then to this day women would not be having the rights to inherit things as they now do have that privilege. So Hazrat Fatima stood her ground, and she fought for it to show other people as an example. If this happens, you don't just accept the injustice, but you make a call against that injustice.
Thank you. Sayyid Razavi, we are talking about how Lady Fatima Zahra alayha salam is a comprehensive model for every dimension in a woman's life. And earlier you mentioned that Islam emphasizes on the woman's role as a nurturer and an educator. How do you feel her example in how she led her life? How did she divide her life? Did she take pride in raising her children and supporting her husband and her father? Or did she just fight for the women's rights in order to go and work outside? And what was the balance that she struck that we can learn from?
Well, according to narrations, Fatima Zahra survived only 75, or maybe according to some riwayat, 95 days after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. and she faced so much difficulties and problems during this 75 or 95 days of her life that there are sayings that subbat in the subbat alayya masaibun no asabat if these calamities had landed on the days, they would have changed into night. So this is what she went through. But why she was important? Because why she was called Abiha? Because she was Mahbat Wahi Ilahi, which means that she used to receive the narration from Wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revelations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam has the title of writing the Wahi of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also he has the title of writing the Wahi revealed on Fatimah Zahra salawatullah alayha. The difference between Wahi on Fatimah Zahra and Prophet is that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to receive rules and regulations and guidance how to rule the society, and Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha used to receive the guidance in how to uplift the spiritual standards of the life, and she had to set the example of being the best man, and this is what she did. She as a ma'asuma, as an infallible lady who is praised by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some people may say why we are comparing Maryam with Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. I would in reply say that Prophet Muhammad used to compare Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. I would not like to quote an incident. Once Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam came, and he knew that Fatima Zahra was suffering with lack of food and providence, and there was nothing in the house to feed the kids and children. So she went and sat on sajjada and prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and suddenly there was a there was fresh food and fruits in her presence, and that's another comparison between Maryam and Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. According to Surah Al Imran, Hazrat Maryam received the food from paradise, and Fatima Zahra not once, several times received this kind of bounty and blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Imam Ali entered and witnessed that he knew that there was no food in house, and then he went to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he asked how this could be possible, so this is my answer to those who criticize that we should not compare Fatima with Hazrat Maryam. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam compared her and said that I praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me with a daughter who is similar to daughter of Zakaria, and that is Maryam, and he praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Prophet can compare Fatima to Maryam, who are we to even discuss this and even disagree with this, that why she should be compared? And there are so many other examples that can be compared with Fatima Zahra and Hazrat Maryam salamullah alayhi. One example, she used to spend time in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once Imam Hassan noticed that she is praying and she is ignoring herself in the prayers and praying for all her neighbors and relatives and friends and everything, and Imam Hassan could not stop asking her, and he asked, why you don't pray for yourself, you are praying for everyone? Then she replied that al-jar, importance to jar should be given first, then summa dar, first jar summa dar. And this was the reply given by Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. So this is and she did this to establish herself as a role model for the women of today in the society. And if we look at the hadith kisa, and this is my message to the mothers of today who are shy to call their children with love and affection. Look at the words of hadith kisa. When Hassan and Hussein come to Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha, how she addresses this is the example she's setting, that you, if you want your children to respect you, you should also give them respect. She's saying apple of my eyes, or apple of my heart, and light of my eyes. These words are quoted in Hadith Qissa, and Hadith Qissa is narrated more by Ahl Sunnah than the Shia sources. And some people even doubt about that. Hadith Qissa is narrated more by Ahl Sunnah in their narrations as a reliable hadith, in which Fatima Zahra is setting an example how to speak to your children, how to give love and affection. This giving of love and affection by mother creates humble leaders in the future, and if the mother does not give love and affection to the children, creates dictators in the society. So mother is that important for us in this society. And Fatima Zahra and Hazrat Maryam were the best role models, and Bibi Zainab salawatullah alaiha was the best role model for all of us.
Thank you. You mentioned excellent points that we can pick up on, but I'd like to pick up on just one thing you mentioned, is the Hadith Kisa, and the fact that Lady Fatima Zahra alayha salam was the teacher of Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, the Sahabi of Rasulullah, whom Ahl Sunnah and the Shia ulama and scholars take a hadith and narrations from. Hadith Kisa is narrated by him, but taught to him by Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam, because when we start, we say, An Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, An Fatima Zahra. She taught the Sahabi of Rasulullah the narration of Kisa, which was something that happened privately in their home. And it shows the importance of this lady as the teacher and educator, and the status of her knowledge in Islam. Thank you, Syed, for this answer. And of course, you also reminded us about her title being the Muhaddatha during the 75 and 95 days that she lived after the demise of Rasulullah. Angels used to come and speak to her and tell her about, to console her and to give her company and tell her about the future events of the Ummah and of her children as well. Moving on to you, Sayyid Faizul Hassan, with my last question of the program before I ask you both for your concluding remarks. Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam, of course, is considered as the culmination of divine feminine perfection. How is that so?
Yes, mashallah, Sayyidina gave a very good example of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, and I just want to add a little point on that, and then I will answer this question. As Sayyidina mentioned about the food becoming food, heavenly food, being brought from heaven to Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam. I just want to add another point. Those people that, if they don't understand the position of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, and they don't see in that rationale, we don't have to go much far. Within this family, Ali Imran, if we see the mother of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, she had the honor of giving birth to Amir al-Mu'mineen in the house of Allah, while Hazrat Maryam had to leave the house of Allah to give birth to Nabi Allah, Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. So perhaps this is a food for thought for those individuals that might want to compare the daughter of the Prophet with Hazrat Maryam and say, why is Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam being given higher credence, preference, and position? So that was just a little point I just wanted to add, and that was because of Sayyidina's comparison on that it came into my mind, and I said, let me share this with you as well, with our audience and viewers. Coming back to your question, Sister Zainab, I believe that if we read the Quran simply from a Quranic perspective, we've got some examples of great ladies that have been mentioned in the Quran. For example, Hajara, Asiya, Hazrat Maryam alayhi salam, etc. But I think all those qualities are found in Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam. I'm not going to go into those details that we understand, but I'm thinking for the general Muslims that are listening to this, maybe they could understand it from this perspective, that whatever Maryam had, Hazrat Fatima had more than that in her as a feminine. Because Hazrat Maryam was never married. She didn't. She only had Hazrat Isa, for example. And the life that Hazrat Maryam lived was only in the mosque, for example, the worship area, for example. But Hazrat Fatima played a pivotal role in moving Islam, for example, as a woman, for example, how She has to deal with the injured in war, for example, how she soothed her father's injuries when he was giving tabligh. So there was a lot of things that Hazrat Fatima did that the other ladies in the Quran did not do, for example. And then of her knowing the great sacrifice, the great sacrifice that was told to Hazrat Ibrahim when Ishmael was being tested, and Hazrat Ibrahim was tested, that this has been ransomed for a greater sacrifice. So it was through her, Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, and she accepted that challenge. For example, while if you see Hajara, when she heard about this, she died when she saw the marks on Hazrat Ismail's neck. And while Hazrat Fatima got to hear about Imam Hussein, her patience and her motherhood was so strong that she, for the sake of Allah and for the love of the Ummah, she accepted this great sacrifice, for example. So all those feminine traits are found in the perfection in our Holy Lady.
Thank you, Sayyid Faizul Hassan. I didn't realize that we are nearly, we have gone over our time for the program. So I would ask you, Sayyid Razavi, for your concluding remark, and we will end the program soon after your conclusion.
I would like to say Salamullah alayha yawma wulidat wa yawma ustushhidat wa yawma tub'asu hayyatan. May Allah give Allah's salams to Fatima Zahra for the day she was born and for the day she became martyr at the hands of oppressors of the time, and for the day she will be raised again as living example and personality who would defend her rights, inshallah, with the help of Imam Mahdi Ajalallah Ta'ala Faraju. May Allah count us amongst the defenders of the rights of Ahlebait alayhi salatu wasalam.
Ilahi Ameen. Sayyid Faizul Hassan, if you would like to also add something.
Just on this special day today is the Shahadat of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam. Basically, what I would say is that those people who do have a chance just to read the khutbah of Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, this will open their eyes of her reality and the dimensions. That is my last words that I will give at the end of this program. To read that khutbah Fadak, it's well documented, its nads are well documented, and they should look into this and you will find the truth.
Jazakumullah khairan to both my honorable scholars, Sayyid Mohammad Razavi, Sayyid Faizul Hassan Zaidi, and condolences to you and to the Imam of our time and to all the believers who are watching us from all across the globe. Thank you for being with us, and join us again next week for another discussion. Until then, fi amanillah.